welcome into another episode on the Setup Man of Live with Lance. We have a really packed show today, but we got a lot of fun things to talk about, Lance. I'm excited.
Let's do it. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm good. And hey, for those of you that are watching live on YouTube right now, you're also probably wondering what's that like random guy in the bottom right-hand corner there. This, my friends, is the newest member, one of the newest members of the Setup Man team. And I wanted to give official introduction to Mr. Sean Hendrickson. Sean, what's up, dude?
Hey guys, what's going on?
What's up? Well, hey guys, Sean's gonna be producing a lot of
these. Full size him? You got to full size him. Come on.
Okay, so we're gonna send Lance down to the bottom then.
Yeah, dude, come on. There you go.
You gave me the corner, man. I was just trying to stay in my place, you know.
Put baby in the corner. Really quick before we get into everything, I wanted to make an official introduction. And Sean, excited to have you on as a producer, help me with a lot of these lives and also doing a lot more behind the scenes. But tell us where you're from and how you became a Cubs fan, and we'll jump into it.
Yeah, so I currently live in the western part of North Carolina, just a little over an hour outside of Charlotte. And my whole dad's side grew up in Chicago. They were hardcore Bears fans, season ticket holders and whatnot. And Dad was in the military. And so when I really started picking up baseball, it was here in the Carolinas, which we're pretty well known for in this area. And every summer we'd go visit grandma and uncles and cousins. And every year we'd always have to see the Kane County Cougars and the Chicago Cubs, unless they weren't in town because of poor vacation planning. But between WGN every afternoon and every Sunday with Dad, and then going to the ballpark every year, it's kind of just a natural affinity. And then the year of Sammy Sosa and the home run chase kind of just took over from there for myself.
Well, so many people our age, that's exactly what we remember too, brother. Well, excited for you to be here. Guys, like I said, we have a very busy show today. Before we even get into this thing with Lance, we're going to be talking about relievers on the market. We're going to be talking about some of the transactions that happened today. Do me a favor. I want you to just copy this link right now for this live. The more people we have in this room, the more opportunity we have to be able to give Lance some really good questions about the Cubs, about the current situation, what roster moves still need to be done. So go ahead and just post it on Twitter right now. Tell everyone to join us live right now. I want to see more people in this room. And for those of you that are here, go ahead and say hello in the comments. Say what's up. Tell us where you're watching from today. Let's do a little bit of a roll call. I want to hear exactly where you're from. Hello, Bernie. Hello, Terry. Hello, Jack. Thank you so much. We're going to get to everyone's questions here in just a quick second. So, Mr. Lance, we're talking today about relievers, but man, I mean, before we even got on here, there was just a flurry of things with it being the arbitration deadline here. So let's just go over some of this stuff right now. Justin Steele avoided arbitration, signed for $6.55 million. Nate Pearson avoided arbitration, $1.35 million. Trade with the Rangers, cash considerations going to the Rangers for Matt Festa, and then goodbye Miles Mastroboni. Just want to start really quick with Justin Steele. That feels low, 6.55. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I gotta admit, I'm not the biggest arbitration nerd, so I don't really know how these things are totally calculated. This is his second year of ARB or first year of ARB? First year of ARB, right?
This was first year of ARB. Yeah, he made $4 million
okay.
this last year. $4 million last year. I think projections were around like 8 or 9. That's why I was kind of surprised.
So this came in a little low. Okay, that's interesting then. Yeah, I mean, they settled, so that's good. That means there was an agreement between both sides. You know, I think I saw Michael King of the Padres didn't settle, so he'll go to court. And arbitration's very binary. It's like that side or this side. There's no just split the difference. And teams spend a lot of money on this process, even though I just think you should just split the difference between the two people and save everybody a bunch of time. But good for Steele. I mean, yeah, he's making some bank there. It's awesome.
I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on Festa just because it literally just happened, and we don't even know if the guy is going to be on the 26-man roster. But Miles Mastroboni, got any good Miles Mastroboni stories for us behind the scenes?
He's jacked, number one, sneaky jacked. It's one of those things when you watch a guy on TV or watch a guy on the field, you may not totally get their physique because pitchers are huge. So if they ever stand next to a pitcher, you're like, that guy's small. And then you actually see him in person, you're like, no, he's kind of sneaky shredded. And I also really respected him in the clubhouse. He was always a really nice guy, very approachable from I have a random question for you that I need an answer to. And he was always willing to entertain it. So I enjoyed my combos with him a lot, actually. He was probably one of the sneakier, fun guys on the team that I enjoyed interacting with.
What was the most you said random questions. What was the most random question you asked, or what was the most interesting conversation you had? One of the two.
When I first met him, I asked him if he'd give me any dirt on the Rays organization. I believe he came from there. Am I thinking of the right guy? Hopefully I'm thinking of the right guy here.
Yeah, he came from the Rays. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah,
Okay,
he
good.
did. Yeah.
And he's like, he didn't really give me it, but he's like, man, someday maybe we'll get coffee and we'll talk it over. So he said it in a way that was like, I'm not entirely sure if everything is great that goes on in the Rays org, because they're generally a pretty cheap organization, but they also succeed and they win, and they push guys into the major leagues who have opportunities. So it's always that side of the coin, right? Rockies, Athletics, some of these other organizations aren't considered great on the minor league side, but those organizations also often give guys opportunity to then become bigger players elsewhere. So kudos in that respect to, I think, some of these smaller organizations like that. But I will have to take him up on that coffee, I think, sometime. So
I like it. All right. We're going to have a lot of time for Q&A. We're going to have a lot of time for any of your questions that you got, guys. And we also want to get started here with really just the bullpen picture. Lance, I made a video yesterday, and I think there's a lot of places on this team right now that are a little bit weak, a little bit like if a couple guys go down, you're kind of like, what's the answer? And you wanted to focus on the bullpen part. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what your assessment is of all this.
Yeah, let's walk through this. So I did a little more like of my standard style analysis here that I do on a lot of my YouTube channel and also at Marquee. Just kind of painting a picture. We're going to walk through 3 relievers, but I'm going to set it up with a scene. This is a graphic from a piece from Eno Saris, really good writer for The Athletic. What he did essentially was take the top 15 teams in baseball that you could consider quote unquote contenders, and then he ranked each position group based on the lowest amount of projected WAR, so projected wins. So essentially asking the question, who has the weakest position groups that maybe they still need to address in free agency. So the Cubs here are an interesting one at 4. They have 3 on this list. I greened first base there because I think they're a little sleepish on the Bush projection overall. This is just one projection outlet. This is just Fangraphs. And then starting pitcher is another one that I think maybe gets short up, or at least the fact that Boyd isn't projected as strongly because of his innings total, etc. But the main one, again, at the top there at 1.4. So again, this is among basically the 15 best teams in baseball. What are the top, say, 5 weakest position groups? The Phillies, corner outfield, Red Sox catcher, shortstop, and then the Cubs relief pitcher. So this is something that needs to be addressed, right? If you're anyone in that in the current Cubs organization looking at projections going forward, this is what you have to attack. And I think it's just a matter, Kyle, of how they attack it.
I got a couple questions here. I know we're not focusing on first base, but I just think it's a joke that a 2.8 WAR player in Michael Bush as a rookie is being projected at 1.7. So there's just my comment. We don't have to talk about it. But I think then the relief pitcher side, I think quality wise, yes, this core is at least from a projection standpoint down this year. But I think from a quantity and ceiling potential, you got guys like Ben Brown. You got guys like potentially Cade Horton coming in. Nate Pearson had a lot of good looks from last year. And if a guy like Julian Merriweather can bounce back and be healthy, I do think, of course, that's a lot of things that have to go the right way. It still makes me feel like there are moves to be made, but I still don't really like see this as being one of the bottom 4 in contention for these teams that are in contention, as you mentioned. It's just, I don't know. It seems harsh.
Yeah, I get that. I think for the most part, with younger guys, projections are generally less optimistic because they're working off sample. And if you have a really long sample of success, then they'll be more bullish on you. But I think what you're implying is almost that like it puts a lot of the focus on player development specifically. If you're talking about like Pearson taking a leap, Porter Hodge returning back to form that he was last year and spreading that over, say, 70 innings. It's a lot of hoping to some extent on the unknowns, and projections are harsh. A lot of the time what they'll end up doing is just saying, we just don't think that'll happen. We'll regress you back to what we think league averages. You don't have enough sample to convince us through the minor leagues and your major league body of work that you're going to be better than this. So I just thought it was interesting. And again, this is among contending teams, right? So the Cubs aren't, they're favored in the division right now, but you probably put them outside the top 5 or so teams in baseball, I would say, from a pure projection standpoint. So these are like this is how the Cubs fare against some of the best. So I think that is fair to like focus on something that maybe isn't totally a weakness, but probably needs to be addressed somehow.
Cool. Okay. So you want to talk about some of these guys that are on the market?
Yeah, I'm going to go. So the angle I took here was going towards guys almost from like a front office perspective. Like you're looking at this guy, you can find projections online as to what these guys might get paid, but from an analysis standpoint, like why is this guy good? So Tanner Scott is the first one you just tossed up there. Throw that out. Tanner Scott is projected as one of the best relievers in this market. He's probably going to get it, 4 years at $50 million a year. So he'll probably get up around 60 mil. Maybe you get him 3 for 45 if you're lucky. Maybe there's opt-outs built in, etc. Why is he worth that amount of money? There's a couple things here that I want to point out. 3 lines here. Velocity, he throws harder than on the right side here, the major league average for left-handed pitchers. Now, the main thing to get into around like pitcher analysis, I think a very basic point to consider is where the guy's release point is. Is it high or is it low? And how much carry is he getting behind the ball? This is probably one of the most basic things to consider, because a lot of the time as you drop your release point, what happens is you're not able to get as much carry on the baseball simply because that vertical motion that you want on the ball is just naturally occurring more on a higher slot. So as you lower a slot, what you expect to see happen is vertical break to go down. So you see Scott at 5 feet 4 inches. Major league average for lefties is 5'11". So he's lower than average. So if you basically covered up that 16.8 and guessed what his vertical break is on the ball, and you want it to be higher to create that carry, so about 15.6 you see there as average, I would expect his to be maybe around 14. Instead, what you see is that he's up at 16.8. So he has about 2 to 3 inches more than you would expect from his individual release height. And that is why he is so good. And this is really hard to do. It's really hard to get a lot of carry from the low slot. It's also really hard to throw 97 miles per hour and be a leverage reliever from the left side. I think this encapsulates who Tanner Scott is as a pitcher. The fact that he has a lower than average release, he's able to carry the ball very well. Those 2 particular points are something I would say in like the modern game has become very targeted by a lot of organizations. Is, are you a low slot guy who can carry the ball really well? This was something that was big when Breslow was in the organization before going to the the Red Sox. And it's why I think for the most part, he's probably worth, I would say 3 for 45. You could get him for 3 for 45. I'd do that. When you get into the 460 plus window, that gets a little spicy for me because he walks some guys, right? He's not a pinpoint command artist. And I know you'd like more command maybe in the bullpen, but I'm interested in what his dollar value is, particularly because I talked to some others in the industry. I think he's being hampered somewhat by the Josh Hader contract, which I'll pull up in a second because I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I think he got a 5-year for 95, which is
I think that's
about
right.
19 a year. So if his team is going to the market and going, hey, I want Hader money because we think we're something like Hader, that Hader contract so far isn't aging particularly well. So he doesn't have a massive amount of leverage, in my opinion, to get, say, 16 plus a year. So I'm curious to see where he lands from a dollar value perspective. And I do think he'd be one of the more fun pieces to add to this bullpen. It's just a matter of whether the money is available to do so.
I know last week we talked about him, and I'm still on the same trajectory here. If I don't think Jed is going to spend that much money for a relief guy. Do you say you think you agree?
I think I agree. I don't think he's going to spend the money. But again, I think that this would be like the piece to hang your hat on that would change that projection we're talking about on the first slide that we showed the most, because Scott is projected aggressively. That would be something that basically would not be an issue from a pure projection standpoint for the organization anymore.
So Tanner Scott, you think is being held up because of the Josh Hader contract. I guess I'm just surprised.
Helped from like a deflating dollar value a little bit where you can maybe get him a little bit cheaper. I think the Hader contract isn't going to age well. Like he had a fine year last year. He regressed a bit.
Fine.
What is he? He's going to go in just age 31 season. He had a 3.8 ERA, which wasn't amazing. Like I don't think a lot of teams are looking at that and going, wow, I can't wait to pay a left-handed reliever $21 million a year over 5 years. I think a lot of them are like, can I get Scott for 14, 13 a year? They're like, I don't like Hader had a much better track record. You're not Hader. So you can't ask for a couple $1 million off what Hader got.
Are you surprised that some of these top guys just haven't been picked up yet, from the Yates and the Hoffmans, the Estevezes? All these guys seem like it. I would just think that a team would want to have their bullpen set earlier in the offseason rather than we're a month away from spring training.
I know, yeah. My only speculation here is that teams are waiting for Sasaki, but I don't think it really makes sense from your point on the relief side, because it's not like Sasaki's impacted by that at all. And it's also not like you're allocating a ton of money to Sasaki from like what do you have available to spend standpoint. That's all international free agent money. So I am a little bit surprised, especially with the precedent of the last years of Montgomery and Snell, having rough years and both admitting that they really started too late. So are we getting into maybe the witching hour of these Flaherty types and Yates and Finnegan and all these others? All these guys, I would imagine, go in the next 2 weeks. I'd be shocked if any of these guys kind of make it into February. Maybe there's one straggler signing, but otherwise I'd be stunned.
Okay. Well, speaking of some of those other guys like Yates, should we go into Yates?
Yeah, let's do Yates. Let's do Yates. A little bit cheaper here. So with Yates, right, he's maybe 1 year, we'll say $8 to $9 million, maybe in that window. He's older. 2023 had a huge problem versus left-handed hitters, which you're looking at right here is behind in the count. So this is when hitters are ahead. Where is Yates throwing his fastball? This is where he got just barreled. He got crushed by left-handed hitters specifically in 2023. He was throwing the pitch up and into left-handed hitters. That's where that red concentration is. When you jump to 2024, this was an adjustment he made that allowed him, I think, partially to put up an unbelievable season at the age of 37 years old, which I really didn't think was possible. I think if a lot of people saw his 2023 stats and saw his prior couple years where he was not as productive, the prior 3 basically, and he missed all 2021, you would look at him and go, okay, he'll probably regress to, a 4.2 ERA-ish type. But I think this was a big thing for him was when he was behind in the count, what he did instead of jamming up in on guys, he took his fastball and put it to the outer third of the plate here. I think this set up his splitter better and allowed him to get back into counts. So this is one of those things, if I'm internally looking at Kirby Yates from a projection standpoint, like how confident are we that this guy pitching at the age of 38 will be able to post a near 2-WAR season? He had a 1.17 ERA in 61 innings last year, which is just nuts for a 37-year-old.
Really
Are you
good.
confident that teams aren't going to now jump on this fastball away as opposed to it being up in? When you're in your advantage as a hitter, you have that initiative to slug. And they crushed that pitch up in. He moved it away. Hitters struggled for the entire year. And I often think with the relievers, it takes like a calendar year to turn things over. If you think about starting pitchers, it's not crazy to have like a 10-start stretch where you dominate. And that's basically what a reliever gets, right? He gets about 60 innings. So I am always curious about subtle reliever adjustments like this and how they project into the next season. Because now the book's out. Now when you're ahead in the count as a hitter, say it's 2-0 or 1-0 or 3-1, that Yates is probably going to go away fastball instead of up in. And maybe it just took the entire year for the league to realize that. So I
want to
wonder
make sure
internally, how teams are thinking about that.
I want to make sure I'm looking at this
Yeah.
the same way you're explaining it. So in 23, and this is just the fastball is what we're looking at.
Just the fastball, yeah.
Okay.
So that red concentration is where he throws the pitch mostly up in. He obviously scattered it around the zone, but when he jumped to 2024, you see that red concentration really hammer away.
Which is interesting because, I look at 23 and I think, well, that's typically a lefty's like weak spot
Right.
is up and
Yeah, I
in,
know.
but he had a much better season in 24. Do you think it's strictly just the fastball or like you said, the splitter, adding that in and maybe the deception of the splitter and the location of where that fastball is?
That's exactly what I think it is. I think it's the fact that if I'm Yates, I want to throw my splitter all the time. And it's a matter of how do I get you into a situation where I can throw it as opposed to just throwing that pitch 60, 70% of the time, like a Tommy Kahnle or a Mark Leiter Jr. did, And I think to some extent, putting this pitch more down in the zone there, away-ish, instead of up in, allowed the splitter to work a bit better in those behind the count situations where it's not like, hey, if it's up, I know it's a fastball. If it's down, I know it's a splitter. Now it's a little more like, okay, away, I know it's a fastball. Down, those differences from a location standpoint are a little closer than they are if you spread and go up down. So subtle things like this, I really like looking at from a kind of pitch analysis standpoint.
So tying this in with the Cubs,
yeah,
one of your favorite pitches from this last year that a lot of
for sure
Cubs were adding in was the splitter. So it feels like that fits in pretty well with what the Cubs already like.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, it feels to some extent like it's a better Mark Leiter Jr. And it is a guy that can maybe put in more leverage innings. He had 33 saves last year. It was the first time he had 30 plus since 2019. So there's a big gap between those. So that's the big thing I think the front office is looking at is like, are we comfortable paying $8 million to this guy when, he had basically 1 year where he would be worth that $8 million. I think if you go back any of the prior 3, he's not worth basically 3 or 4 million. So it's a tough one. He's old. These guys generally bounce back and then kind of fall off a cliff and retire. He's probably looking for a 1 year. You'd be rolling the dice a bit. And I think you'd be rolling the dice on that adjustment that he made to left-handed hitters specifically sticking. So obviously I'm more confident in Scott. Yates kind of the cheaper alternative, right? Only 1 year commitment, cheaper AAV. And that maybe brings us to Finnegan we can hit on here at the last point, which is like, this was probably the cheapest guy you go after. He was projected in ARB for about 8.5 million. I think he's probably only going to get like 5 to 6, I would imagine. Otherwise, the Nationals would have just scooped him up at the 8.5 specifically. He's a guy that I like from one particular standpoint. The Nationals are a team that I think is somewhat on the up and up, but this is what we're looking at right here is essentially a pitch distribution, right? So the biggest part red there is how much he throws his four-seam fastball, 67% of the time, 68% of the time. It's a lot. There was a splitter 27% and a slider 6% or so. This changes a bit based on handedness, but if you're facing Finnegan, you're going, I'm getting a fastball almost 7 of every 10 times, and then I'm probably getting splitter the other 3, and I'll just spit on the slider. The thing that's in blue here is the run value. This is essentially what is the production of this pitch on a 100 pitch basis. So I throw 100 of these pitches. If it's a positive number, that means I'm saving that amount of runs. If it's a negative number, that means I'm giving up more runs than average. So the slider here, not a particularly good pitch. It makes sense that it's at low usage. The thing here that always perplexes me with some guys is say, okay, my splitter is better from a run value perspective than my fastball. Perhaps this is somewhat count driven, but I'm going to leave that aside for a second. The basic analysis from my perspective here is just pull the fastball usage down to somewhere around, say, 50-55%. Don't be as aggressive with it, up at 67-68%.
Yeah.
And you as a pitcher will become a better pitcher because the quality of your splitter is better than the quality of your forcing fastball. There's a lot of organizations in baseball that have really throttled this. If you think of like the Red Sox last year, really backing off a lot of four-seamers overall. And what happens in a lot of orgs is that if they don't fully buy into that philosophy, what you run the risk of is a guy like this going to another organization that is much sharper from a, hey, let's optimize your usage perspective and getting more out of the player. So he had a really good year last year. I think a lot of people think he might regress slightly. He's like 33 years old. You know, he had a bunch of saves, so he's probably comfortable from, I think, like a psychological standpoint and leverage. But the overall projections aren't glowing on him. But the one thing projections won't take into account is something like this, like a usage change. If he changes some of the usage, backs off the fastball, I think he could kind of break your projection, so to speak. And I imagine if I was the Cubs looking at this guy, didn't want to spend 15 a year on Scott, didn't want to spend 8 a year, someone else goes to $9 to $10 million for Yates for a 1 year, you can maybe come back to Kyle Finnegan and go, okay, we're running some risk here that the strategy doesn't work, but we think there's a chance we unlock you from a usage perspective, pull your fastball down, give us more splitter, and maybe he ends up being a nice leverage option for them in the pen.
I just hope, I guess in hearing that, I agree. I agree that, you know, hey, they don't want to spend money on these guys. They don't want to spend money on these guys, but you've already built all this quote unquote depth with minor leaguers who to me are already behind all the guys that are on your 40-man roster. So why not just get one? Go get one Kirby Yates. Go get one Jeff Hoffman. Go get one. I don't know. I know that there's some metrics of that Carlos Estevez maybe had a better year than he was supposed to, but just one guy to give a little bit of like, okay, that's reliable. It's I know relievers are volatile, but at least there's some proof of concept there. You know what I mean?
I agree. I think some stability there would be nice. And that gets back to the initial projection that we were looking at, right? Where it's like projections are basically pointing out, I think what you're saying right there, where it's like, hey, if you guys added like one piece here that could get you a WAR, this basically doesn't become an issue anymore. And I think it's going to cost probably $10 to $15 million for them to do that. Otherwise, you're taking on some risk that Yates maybe subtly bottoms out or gets hurt, or if Finnegan, the adjustment doesn't work as much. So I'm really curious to see what happens. I know there's some third-party facilities, Tread Athletics, Driveline Baseball, having what they call pro days. So basically unsigned guys can throw pens for teams. And I imagine the Cubs are going to be at both Drivelines and Treads. So this also might be a window of time where we're talking about like, why is the reliever market slow? I wonder whether teams are going to go and take a peek at these guys, look at their data and see what they did this offseason and maybe find a couple values. But yeah, I'm wondering what their strategy is from the relief side, because they got to do something. Thielbar, I don't think is enough. You know, it's a fun pen right now. It's just a really risky pen. And this was the issue last year as well.
Well, I saw it said in a comment somewhere the other day, and it makes a lot. I get like, okay, you're not going to get your most WAR from the bullpen unless it's a really top of the line closer. But someone said, stop spending, 2 years on guys like Trey Mancini for $7 a year and put it towards a reliever that is actually going to like be legitimate. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Like you're testing out a guy that maybe in Trey Mancini 2 years ago could have been again a 2.5 WAR player for a couple of years, but the ceiling or the floor was a lot lower when you could have just been like, all right, let's just go get a reliever that we know is going to be a 1 to 1.5 WAR kind of reliever and just slot him in, and we've got some confidence in the back of the bullpen. Did you lose me? Are you there?
Lost you for a second there. Yeah.
Okay. No, I was just rambling. It doesn't even matter.
No, I get what you're saying. You're saying like stop piecing together the bench with random guys and go after.
That's
reallocate
exactly
that money.
Yeah.
And you have the prospects now, I think, to back up some of these Mancini types that they've signed in the past for no reason, it seems, and that they cut midway through the year. They're just kind of trying to get lightning in a bottle, and it's like, okay, we'll just go for the stability of a reliever, and maybe you end up with a pen guy that has 30 saves, and you're more confident if you're not totally thinking Hodge is going to save 35-40, which I'd love to see him. But again, you have to build in some risk there. That does not happen. And again, going back to the point we mentioned a ton of this channel, like Scott and Hodge back to back in the pen, flipping those guys in and out 8-9, depending on the lineup coming up, lefties versus righties and stuff, is like,
That's fun.
that'd be a dream if I was counsel. Like, that is exactly what I want.
Absolutely. Sean, you got any thoughts on all this, brother?
It's a lot of information. It's kind of,
I know.
I'm geeking out though. I geek out about it. I'm like, oh, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. I guess for me, I was like, okay, why? I know you specifically focused on Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates. Like, I've heard Yates can get anywhere from 8 to 10 million, 1 year deal. Tanner Scott, I guess we're not going to go over the 19 mark like you said with Hader. So you're hoping around 14 to 16, and then the projections for someone like Jeff Hoffman are 12 to 13, 14 million. I mean, do you think it's just the Cubs are just not interested in committing to 2 to 3 to 4 year deals for guys like a Hoffman or a Tanner Scott? And like, again, if we're worried about depth at the starting position and the relief position, wouldn't Jeff Hoffman be an answer to potentially both those situations, whether you want to stretch him out as a starter or, man, we really need him as a relief piece?
Yeah, I'd love Hoffman. I think Hoffman's in that window. I'm curious. His agency seems like he's pushing him as a starter. So, like, I think that would fit with the Cubs. I just wonder whether they're trying to find a fit and they're willing to take $12 million a year with like an opt-out or something. That's like, no, we want him to throw 160 innings and we're going to look at your rotation and see the Cubs have Wicks and all these other guys that are probably going to gobble up some innings. It's like, we might go to the team that has 4 starters and a really weak 5 and be like, we'll take 12 to go here. Give us a player option after this year. If Hoffman goes out and does what Reynaldo Lopez did last year, he probably gets 18 a year for 3 years or something along those lines. So that one feels like there's more like puzzle pieces too. I love Hoffman. I think he's a great pitcher. I'd love him as a reliever. I'd love him as a starter. It's just, I think there's more like logistics there as to how the agency is pitching him and whether he's actually a starter or a reliever, how any of this works with him. So, I don't know. If he's a reliever, I think he's going to make around Scott money. I bet he would get 13 to 15. Just the term would maybe be a little bit shorter. That contract's going to be structured oddly to me, I think, if he is pitched as a starter and signs as a starter.
So I'm sorry, I was going to cut you off.
No, go for it.
Would you rather go for someone like a Hoffman or a Tanner Scott, or would you try to link up somebody like maybe a Finnegan and an Estevez? Like,
I would just go after the guy. I would go after the dog. I'd go after Hoffman or Scott. But again, it's a monetary thing, right? If the Cubs if they only have $20 million to spend for this year, the rest of this offseason, like, it's very unlikely to me that they go after a guy like Tanner. They're probably going to piece together a Finnegan and maybe 2 pro day guys, as I was talking about, that are a couple $1 million each with a spring invite to see who's best, et cetera.
Yeah.
And they just rely on Morgan and Hodge, et cetera. So, but again, I operate more money agnostic in a lot of these situations where it's like, I think Scott and Hoffman would make a massive difference on this team. Going back to the first thing we showed, it would solve a problem that is a clear problem if they want to try to contend.
I'm going to ask you another money question here in a second, but before we do, guys, we're about to start the Q&A portion of this chat with Lance. Before we do, if you're not following Lance on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. He is so close to 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. You're so close.
You're
brother.
almost at 5K too. Yeah, we're hopefully
that'd be cool.
We're
hitting some milestones here.
Yeah.
Sean's gonna throw his link into the comments so you can just click and subscribe. And then also, while you're at it, Sean, go ahead and throw the link to our Facebook group. We've created a free Facebook group. It's called Cubs Talk, and we're having a good time. We're throwing some entertaining posts that we're seeing. Brian in there is posting a lot of fun stuff. A lot of the Setup Man team is posting some fun stuff. But it's been cool to just be in a group where we're chatting Cubs offline, online technically, but offline from our YouTube channel. So go ahead and see that link in the comments, and then we will see you there. While Sean is getting some of these questions ready, Lance, I asked a few people in our core group last night, how confident are you that the Cubs are going to reallocate that money? I got a mixed bag. Reallocate the money of Bellinger is what I'm referring to, that 25 plus, and then just assuming they were already going to spend another 10 to 15, putting them somewhere around 35 to $40 million spent before the offseason is done. What's your confidence level that they spend 35 to 40 before, and some of that might come via trade, just taking over a contract, right? But where are you at on that?
You're saying 35 to 40 more rest of offseason here?
Yeah.
I think I'm like into the 0 to 10% confidence interval
Wow.
there. Yeah,
Wow.
super low. I don't
Is
think they
it?
come close to that. I think that one of the more underrated things is like they almost accidentally went over last year. And as I mentioned, I
Yeah.
think before in our lives, is like I don't think they want to go over 2 years in a row. And I wonder whether it was like you guys accidentally went over last year. This is again, it's not reporting. It's
Yeah.
literally just my speculation. Is like
Right.
you guys, that budget is lower this year. Like you cannot go over. Like if you want a shot at Tucker next year and pay him $45 million a year, like we can't go over 3 years in a row because the tax gets insane. So like you could obviously like that's what Cohen, the Dodgers, and all these other teams are going to do. But if Ricketts doesn't want to do that, then you got to reset. So I'm not totally confident. I would say they spend maybe 20 mil rest of the way. I don't know. That's my speculation.
Here's where I'm at. I'm in the middle. And the reason I'm in the middle is because when I talked to Jesse Rogers, if you guys missed that conversation, you definitely want to check that one out.
Very really good interview.
Conversation about the whole money picture of the Cubs organization. When I talked to him, I was like, oh, wow, they probably won't reallocate that money. Not in full. And then I heard Patrick and Shahadev Sharma on Northside Territory talk about it. And they're like, probably on the opposite end of you. They're like, they're going to reallocate that money.
Really? Wow. Okay.
So that kind of brought me back to like middle. But either way, I think if you don't at least spend $25 million between now and the start of the season, the fans are going to be like, WTF? Why didn't you just hang on to Cody Bellinger? Like, because that was in it wasn't verbal, it wasn't public, but the non-verbal of that was we are going to go out and reallocate that money for better opportunities throughout our entire roster. And if you don't do that, then why do you trade for Kyle Tucker? What is that not an all-in move? Like
it's a fair point. I think the one thing I've run to, and I hate playing like I don't know, there's some phrase here like owner apologist, you know what I mean? But I do think a lot of the time what happens is like we're running into this with the Orioles, which I think are very fairly critiqued, given the fact that they have a really young core that's cost controlled and they're not spending on top of it. They didn't pay Burns, etc. Maybe they offered Burns something big. We don't know. But they pick up Charlie Moore on a cheap contract, and like their number 5 right now is Trevor Rogers, who was terrible the last 2 seasons. And like they got a new owner, and it's like I thought you were supposed to spend. And it's like I wonder whether a lot of the time what we run into is just like we want that money spent now. Whereas Sahadev and Patrick might be right. This money might be reallocated, but it may not be reallocated this right now in this window. Maybe it's reallocated at the deadline when there's a $20 million Luis Castillo and the Mariners are out of the playoffs again and he looks great and you got to take on $8 million of that contract and you're willing to do it. Like I wonder. That's why I push so hard against like the 35 to 40 left, because like if I'm a GM trying to structure that money out, I would want to save somewhere around 10 million to 15 million for the deadline, where I can make like an absolute power move where it's like we get there, our starters look okay, but like you match us up with some of these other teams in the NL, we need another frontline guy. Like we're good with Shota, we're good with Steele. After that, I don't know, like give me Luis Castillo there. Now all of a sudden in a 5-game set, you're getting 3 really good pitchers off the top that I'm confident can win against anybody in baseball. And to do that, you have to have some financial flexibility, or you have to be willing to go over again, which I don't think they're willing to do. So that's how I would look at it. It's just like maybe a little bit of patience of like, maybe they don't spend 40 right now. Maybe they spend 15 now and then 8 at the deadline. And then there's your 25, or 15 now, 10 at the deadline, or something along those lines. Like, I do think you kind of have to like play around with that. I wonder how flexible they'd be in terms of like allocating this money. I would just imagine that's how they think about the money left. Like if this is the budget and we could get right up to the luxury tax and not go over, how do we want to allocate that? Or maybe they allocate into next offseason. Next offseason, there's a ton of starting pitching that's available. And I wonder, like with the Orioles too, I wonder whether they're waiting for that. Maybe their evals on all these guys weren't great. They offered Burns something big. He decided to go to the D-backs. And I don't know, maybe Morton was their guy. And then they look at this offseason and they're like, ooh, we really like Framber Valdez or something along those lines. And we're willing to pay him 25 a year. It's just, we want to get there.
Listen, if
that's my angle. It's just a contrasting angle, but it's something to consider.
If they go get a guy like a Castillo or a Pablo Lopez, add in Kirby Yates for 1 year, I mean, we're looking. I'm instantly way more confident that this was a off season, A- at worst, a off season. But and then you add in another bat on the bench, and then I'm really happy. But it's time for Q&A. Let's go ahead and get to it. Sean, what do you got for us, brother? I'm going to let you read the questions.
Yeah. So first one here is from Justin. Justin says at the beginning of this, he says, Lance, keep doing your thing, brother. Big fan. Kyle,
Appreciate
great
it.
work as well for you. You guys are awesome. His question is, would you pick up Pablo Lopez or Jack Flaherty if those two options are still available at this point?
I think my lean's Lopez. I'm a little skeptical on Flaherty. We've seen him like multiple times not be great and have like these in and out seasons where, he had a really strong, what was that, like 2019 or 18 with the Cardinals, where he was like the best pitcher on the planet, and then
Very good.
wasn't good for 2.5 years, 3 years, mediocre starter, and then like absolutely deals with two orgs last year, who I think are both sharp on the pitching side in terms of the Tigers and the Dodgers. Pablo, I like just more from a pure like horse standpoint, and I just think I'm getting more stability there. He's pitched in the playoffs. He has that experience. I really like him from like a cerebralness standpoint and how he talks about the game and talks about his mix and some of the adjustments he's made since 2022 when he left Miami, I think he was traded from Miami. So yeah, I would take Pablo there if you're giving me both those guys and not considering cost.
Okay. Any follow up there, Kyle?
No. I was just gonna say I mean, it looks like we've got about 12 questions or so, and I don't know your deadline here, Lance, but want to let you know
we can rip them.
A lot of action.
Try to get them all. Here. Let's do it.
Jack threw this up here 3 times. Says, hey, do you think Matt Festa will be like Tyson Miller 2.0?
Let's go.
That's not a terrible comp. I think Festick strikes out a little more there. But if you want to go to the nerd side, which I won't get back to the nerd stuff, but like the Cubs love what you call like a cut fastball. So it doesn't move arm side as much. When you're watching the television, you watch Steele, you're almost like, is he throwing a cutter? Like that ball's barreling in on right-handed hitters. And like they love that shape. The Cubs in the minor leagues love that shape. It's more from a standpoint of like not going to generate swing and miss, but does a really good job of like staying off barrel and not allowing big slug. I think that's why the Cubs love it, and other organizations as well, not just the Cubs. So Festa's a little different in that respect, but they both have big sweepers. I probably project more strikeouts for a guy like Festa than I would for Miller, so subtle difference there. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a terrible comp. 2.0, he comes in, you're right, he killer to some extent, and you probably get some length out of him.
I don't know. You said before we started recording,
they might try to run him through waivers. I'm not confident this guy's going to be on the Japan roster, the opening day roster.
You said
before
we went live, you said that he's the next Porter Hodge. So I'm cool.
You did.
His shapes are like almost identical to Porter Hodge. You pull up like a map of how his pitches move, they're like identical.
Matt Festa, closer for the Cubs 2025. Here we go.
All right, I got an interesting one here. Would you rather, just a solid closer, right? Or would you rather do like the Dodgers here, like Will Stradamus? I can't even say his name. Will Stradamus.
There we go.
Right, do like the Dodgers, having multiple guys who can close, because closers are volatile, especially in the postseason.
Yeah, the Dodgers play this game, and I think sharp organizations that know they're going to be in the postseason every year play this game. I think the Yankees did it too. They did a really good job where you basically have multiple options that are all really good. Well, it's just like, duh, like, of course, that's what every pen should have. But, like, they have very specific things they're good at, Like, Edmund Phillips is, like, really good versus bullpenness. You can use him in any situation. Gratterall is, like, your righty sinker guy. I'm trying to think of who else was in that pen. Think of, like, the Padres or Tanner Scott. He's your lefty killer. He's coming up when Shotani's in. The Yankees had like Luke Weaver, Holmes. Like Weaver's kind of your changeup guy to get lefties out. Fastball proved so much that I think I'd be comfortable using him versus righties. But Clay Holmes is like your high slot sinker guy. Like having very defined roles, but multiple of them. So like instead of having one Clay Holmes, I'm gonna have Clay Holmes, and then I'm gonna have like another big sinker righty, and then I'll have a lefty in Hill, that low slot lefty that the Yankees had. And I'll have another guy where it's like you can mix and match such that when you get late game, those hitters are not expecting a certain particular pitcher to come up. It's not like the old days. You remember that Royals team, Wade Davis, Kelvin Herrera, and who am I missing there? Greg Holland, those three, right? That was like 7, 8, 9. Like the Braves had this too with O'Flaherty, Kimbrel, and someone else I'm forgetting. Johnny Venters, same idea, right? It's like 1, 2, 3. Like you're getting these three guys. I like the idea a lot of teams are moving towards where you kind of mix and match and almost create like a puzzle such that you can like solve for any lineup or pinch hitter that comes in late game. I think better teams are doing this. But again, it's a team that is willing to put resources into their pen from a dollar standpoint and also from a player development standpoint, where the Dodgers turn these guys out, man. Like they're Anthony Bandes, who I'm thinking of too, is the other lefty from the Dodgers. They gave him a sweeper. They made him nasty. He was terrible for like 4 years with the Nationals and Diamondbacks. Like taking those guys, making them relevant, giving them a role late in the postseason is like, I love that. So I agree with Will Stradamus there. Like I would love, if I was constructing a pen, I would do that. But again, it's a dollar thing. Like Sure, go out and get Tanner Scott, Hoffman, Holmes, etc., and there's your pen. But you just spent $45 million on a pen? No, you're not. So it's a matter of like stitching together both the dollar side and also the player development side. I'd love to see you with like a Ben Brown. Like Ben Brown would be really fun. Pretty platoon neutral curveball shape because of how it's not sweepy, it's more down. Yates, splitter guy, again, down. So it's pretty platoon neutral. He's not going to have issues versus either handedness, in my opinion. So maybe that's what the Cubs are doing. It's just like we will take the guys who do not have distinct lefty righty problems. Theo Bar will be kind of our lefty killer if we need that vert fastball to get by lefties. But overall, like let's go with guys we can use in any spot. But we'll do it in the cheaper way where we're not going to create like an absolute demon bullpen. We'll go with like the more affordable tweener guys.
Do you think Theo Bar, for lack of a better term, is the token lefty, or do you think it's more likely Luke Little?
Man, it seems like Little's healthy. I think I saw Rich Biesterfeld, who's a great photographer, does awesome stuff down in Arizona, shoot a picture of him. So we got to get a health report there. Yeah, there we go. He's the man. I feel like we need the health report. I don't know if we're going to get that at CubsCon where they just go, hey, is this guy healthy or is this guy healthy? Or like the fan questions are just like, hey, do you view Luke Little as like, where's he in his progression? I feel like we just need that update of like the reporters get to spring, everyone reports, and then you just fire away on council is like, where's Little in his throwing program? Where's Horton in his throwing program? Like all these things will be answered in a matter of like a month, I would say.
Cool. Got another one, Sean?
Yeah, I got another one for you here. This is from Jacob Rock Irabagon. If I said that wrong, Jacob, I'm sorry. Hi, Lance. What would you think about trading for a reliever instead of signing one? Someone like an Alec Vesia or a Ryan Thompson seem like they'd be a great addition and probably cheap.
I'd love Alex.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. The problem I run into is like there probably aren't a ton of teams that have expendable relievers that they're willing to trade. I wonder if the way to go about it is through like claims and stuff. This is what like the Rays do every offseason, the Dodgers do. They like claim these guys or they trade for cash or they pick up some random dude that no one cares about and then they make them better. And I think the Cubs have a reasonable track record of doing that with, Mark Leiter Jr. is a great example. He started and then he became a really good leverage reliever. Who else am I thinking of here? That's what I'm thinking of. Merriweather was hurt, and then like they got him healthy. He dealt. So they have some track record of that. I'm just not sure. Is there anyone they've acquired this offseason that feels like that right now? I'm not entirely sure. Like Theo Bar has a track record. Morgan is like your stability multi-inning guy. He's going to give you like 1 1/3, 1 2/3. They don't have like that. We think this is a revitalization project piece, and I wonder whether that's coming.
I don't know much about Heller. Wasn't that kind of?
Yeah, Heller's not a bad one.
Okay.
I wonder if he's more AAA to start and then comes up. But he's the Tread Athletics guy. I was talking about like these pro days where guys who aren't signed go and pitch. He worked with that company for a period of time, and I also know he's Zombro. He's a Zombro guy. Tyler Zombro was hired into the pitching department at the front office level. So yeah, I could see him as like a reclamation project to some extent. Maybe not in the same way that like a Anthony Banda or some of these other guys were, but yeah, maybe that's your token out of nowhere guy, I would say.
Yeah. By the way, I know you just threw it up there. Can we throw Rich's comment back up there, Sean?
Oh, sorry. Yep. Let me get it.
There it is. Luke Little, Jordan Wicks, and Ben Brown.
Awesome.
Playing catch at Sloan today. Thank you, Rich.
That's great. That's great news.
Yeah. Awesome. What do we got next, Sean?
All right. Next one. You kind of already answered this for Will Stradamus. Sorry. What are your thoughts on Hoffman? Would you bring him in as a reliever, make him a starter? Can you like to maybe just summarize it for those that might have missed it, maybe in like 60 seconds, just to give him that?
I'm not sure how the Cubs would view him as to whether reliever start. Well, that's a good question. I wonder whether the Cubs would prefer him as a reliever. I just feel like they have a little bit of depth from like Wicks and Assad and these other fives that like, I don't know, like you want to stretch out Ben Brown? Like we still don't really know what the plan is there. I think it makes more sense to be Penn this year, but I also think like I love him as a starter still. I always have. I hope he has a new splitter. I have no idea if he does, but that's always been my fingers crossed project for him. I would imagine they bring him as a reliever. And I think that goes back to the point of I just wonder whether his agency's pitching him more as a starter because it's more advantageous for him to start for a year, opt out of a contract. He gets a player opt out after 1 year, and then he goes and gets more money because he's now a starter and he's proved it, which he's done in the past too. So I wouldn't be stunned if he's able to kind of accept that workload again from a body perspective. So my gut is the Cubs will bring him as a reliever, but I would bet he's not a Cub because there's another team that's like, we'll give you a chance to start. Maybe that's not as strong of a contender as the Cubs, but has a spot that they could give him. Hey, if you're healthy for 150 innings, here you go. They're all 150-year years. I think the Cubs were maybe a little more hesitant on that. Where it's like, you can come in, we think we can get you to 100, couple out of the pen, and we'll give you 50 starting or something along those lines. I don't know how attractive that would be to Hoffman's camp, so to speak.
Nate Pearson, do you think the talk of him getting a shot at a starting role is hearsay, or do you think it's actually going to be seen in spring training?
I don't see. I think it makes sense that if you're thinking about starting a guy, even on a low percentage chance, to like ramp him into the season as if he's a starter, because it's much easier to like toggle down that workload and make him reliever than it is to do the inverse, where it's like, we spent all offseason prepping you as a reliever and now we need you as a starter, so get going. Like, I think it's much more likely he went into the offseason with a more elaborate plan of like, hey, we want to try to get you to 100 innings in one way or another, so like build your body up. Here's what we want you to do from a conditioning perspective and throwing perspective. We'll start you throwing earlier, build up some capacity, and we get you into spring. You're throwing 3 to 5 innings. You know, we have you start, and then we also have the option to like push you back into that if we want to April and May you as a reliever. So I don't think that's complete made up, stuff. I would say that that's more of like how most teams would probably approach a guy that they're uncertain on the role for.
Cool. All right, Sean, what we got next?
Yep. You said Ben Brown. So Cody asked this question. He says, Lance, do you think Ben Brown could be the guy used as a back end arm if they go the route of Finnegan plus those 2 value plays with the spring training invite?
What's up, Cody? Hope you're well, man. Yeah, I think Brown could definitely be used as a back end arm. I just always like him as a starter. I just think you have years of control on him. The ultimate upside of a guy like that is a starter. You get him to be like a 4 or 3. He develops the third pitch. He's now fastball split, death ball, maybe throwing a sinker along the way or something along those lines. And like he starts to flesh out, but he's had the opportunity to start and succeeded as a starter, such that I'm not totally like, because we have pen issues, he needs to now be the closer. Sure, midseason, you could get into that situation. But to the point I was just saying about Pearson, if I'm an organization and a guy has a chance to start, I'm entering him in spring training as if he is a starter, because it's easier just to roll him back into a reliever than it is to do the inverse. So I think like maybe we get to this Cubs Con, or we get to the first reporters in early February, whoever's down there, Bastian, Megan, Maddie Lee, etc. And it's like all these guys are being treated as starters, like Pearson, Brown, etc. And then the fodder becomes, oh my God, they have too many starters. Why isn't one of these guys a leverage reliever, or why aren't we pushing him as a reliever? But I just think like from a workload standpoint, I would work these guys as much as possible to prep them to potentially start, and then figure out what I want to do come March, late March, early April, as to like what their actual role is. So my lean is, sure, he could be a back end guy. I'd prefer him as a starter.
Lance, I want to, again, tinfoil hat here, right?
Yeah.
Council had Woodruff and Burns, started them in the bullpen. He's seen what's happened with Cade Horton and Ben Brown. Each of them have had 2 season-ending injuries. Horton going back to his college days. Yeah. Brown once in the majors, once in the minors. Horton last year in the minors. Maybe he's just saying, hey, listen, guys, writing is on the wall. I told you we should just be focusing on these guys as relievers, but now they've been injured so much. Like, let's just start them the way I started Burns and Woodruff, and then eventually make them those type of guys. What do you think?
I don't mind that, but I don't think so. Like, to my point, it's going to be harder to make those guys starters this year. So if the question is like, what are we doing this year for the rotation? Then you kind of have to almost next them out. It's like, we're probably going to cap a guy at 70 to 80 innings, and if we think we're going to make the postseason, we're projected to win the division, like he's going to be a reliever down the road there. So if he throws 60 to 70 in season, we need him for another 5 to 10 postseason. You have to kind of consider all that workload for this individual guy. So I don't hate that. I would like that a lot more if there was a true 4 or 5, because the 3 right now is Boyd to some extent, right? So it's like, or Tyon, I guess you could say, is the 3. Boyd's the 4. So if I was much more confident in the 5, you throw another piece in there. You throw a Sasaki in there or something. Then I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah. Like, I'm totally fine if you like really just want to get those guys healthy for this year. Horton and Brown become leverage pieces for late season. Both, maybe Horton debuts midseason, Brown's in the pen out of the gate. I'm fine with that. Pearson, same idea. But like, until you fit in another starter for me and make me more confident that you have 5 guys who can give you however many innings, you think of that like pitcher pie in a given season. Like, who's taking the biggest chunks of that? Once I get more confident in that, then I become more accepting of like, Ben Brown needs to be a bullpen arm, etc. For now, I want Brown as a starter. I think that's his ultimate role down the line. If he was in other organizations that had a little more flexibility and didn't have a huge pen problem, that guy would be a starter.
Well, and where I come from on that is the fact that all the rumors this offseason the majority of the rumors this offseason have been all towards starting pitchers. So I do think there still is a starting pitcher that is going to be acquired by the Cubs, which is going to give you that confidence. And then at that point, you're probably going to say, okay, now it makes sense. But if it doesn't happen, I agree with you. There's got to be some sort of, okay, well, really, if our number 4 is Boyd and our number 5 is Assad, that could change any day. One of them goes down, and now who's coming up? You got to have those guys ready to go for sure.
Agreed.
Sean, looks like we had a couple more.
Yep, just like I got a couple quick ones for you here.
Yeah.
Ross Webb said I heard that we might trade for Presley. Is there any truth to that?
I saw that too.
I haven't heard anything around that specifically. I thought that was something more that could have been possible within the Tucker trade. I don't know whether it was actually discussed, but I thought it made sense to maybe pull back a reliever. It just never happened. So I couldn't tell you yes or no there. I just haven't heard anything on it.
Okay. Another quick one here for you is whatever happened with Jorge Lopez.
That's a great question. I'm not entirely sure. He's still free agent, right?
Yeah, still free agent.
Yeah, he could be a guy to bring back. He has a counsel relationship as well. I think that was one of the reasons they were confident in taking him on after that really weird Met scenario in season. He was good too. I mean, like I enjoyed him. I don't think he's a leverage reliever, you know. I think he's more like I'd be comfortable with him as like a 7 or a 6. I don't think I want him backing the 8th or 9th or something. But again, I wouldn't hate it. It'd be cheap. So like maybe that's their approach here. I'm not entirely sure why he hasn't been bubbled more. That's a good point.
What do you think, Lance? Did he say worst team ever or worst teammate ever?
I think he's a teammate. Come on. Yeah. It's very obvious. Like, I don't think
I'm not trying to put you in hot water. I knew what your answer was going to be.
Yeah. That was a weird situation. I'm shocked that the Mets were like, bye right after that. It's like, I didn't say that. Like, I don't know. I felt bad for him to some extent. It's just a weird situation.
Yeah. All right. We got anything else there, Sean?
There's one more in the comments, but it changes gears from pitching to just a hitting thing. So I'll throw my pitching question in real quick.
Yeah, let's do it.
So we talked about all the free agent signings that we can do. Do you think it's more likely we end up trading for a starter and a relief guy? I've thrown this out to Kyle, like the Luis Castillo and the Munoz. Oh, is it Andres Munoz?
Yeah, Andres Munoz, the closer. Yeah.
So, is it, again? I'm asking it under the premise of like I'm looking at our 40 man, and I'm only really seeing like maybe 3 or 4 guys that I think we really would want to part way with. I think the Galloways, Zastrisnys, maybe Keegan or Festa if he doesn't make it. Like, there's not a ton of like legitimate space. There's a lot of young upcoming prospects on that 40 man. So to just go sign Tanner Scott. Do you think that they're probably just waiting for that rookie chip to fall so we can look at other trade pieces in like a combo deal?
I could see that. I mean, maybe there's a small chance that like Roki goes to the Mariners and then they have too many rotation pieces and that pulls down the Castillo price because it's like, hey, we got to trade him. We didn't really think Sasaki was going to come here, you know? I don't know. It could be a possibility. He goes to the Giants. I don't know if they have any spendable pieces. Maybe like it'd be fun to see like Kyle Harrison become available. I don't know. He's struggled as a young pitcher in Major League Baseball. I'd still take a flyer on him. Trying to think of other teams. If the Dodgers grab them, yeah, I mean, they got a bazillion rotation options. I don't really know what to tell you there. I doubt they're going to trade anybody. Who was the Padres? He'd probably be their 5. So, like, yeah, I could see people waiting for that piece to fall and it influencing some of the market. As to your question as to whether it's more likely they trade for someone, yeah, I think it is because I just don't think they're going to spend $22 million on a Flaherty type or anything like that. So, I think this deal makes a lot of sense. I just wonder too, like they were considered in trade, like the Luzardo trade, it seemed like they were in on some extent and the Phillies scooped them. There's already rumors of Sandy Alcantara to the Red Sox and some other teams. Like the Marlins are cleaning house there.
Yeah.
Sandy would be an unbelievable piece. You're going to have to give up a bit there.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to have to give up guys that are probably further off too for the Marlins timeline. So I know this makes me a little bit more comfortable than say like giving up a Casey, but maybe it's like a Casey and a Jefferson Rojas or something. Cause I think he's got another year or 2 of control. But also like an Edward Cabrera, who's kind of like I wouldn't say damaged goods, but he hasn't been good at the major league level the last couple of years. He had a flash in 22, I think it was. Throws super hard. I think there's some easy adjustments there to make with him. I doubt you can get him now, though. I wonder whether the new pitching brass coming into the Marlins kind of fixes some things. The value goes up, and then he's a deadline guy. So the Marlins would be a team that I'd key on from a Sandy perspective and also from Edward Cabrera's perspective if I was the Cubs. And given the fact that they talked about Luzardo, I'd be stunned if they also haven't discussed those other names. So, I mean, it just seems natural. I'm not going to report it, but it's one of those things where it's like, you don't think that at least at some point on that call, we're like, what's the Sandy price? You know, like, no, we're just talking Luzardo this entire time. It's like very unlikely. I don't think that conversation goes like that.
Lance, we are at the end of the time here, so I'm going to go ahead and say thank you. If you guys are not following Lance on YouTube, make sure you do. We've got it right there on the banner. It's also in the comments. My last question for you, do the Cubs make a move before CubsCon? I think they have to, right?
Yeah, I feel like they do, right? Is it an at CubsCon move? Do you think it's going to carry that much weight? Do you think they pull
a curveball
like the
me
Roki at CubsCon? That would
in fact, you know how they announced it? It's not even going to hit Twitter yet. He's just going to come out from behind the curtain.
Oh my god!
And then Boog's just going to go straight into an interview with him with a translator. It's going to be awesome.
What if Sammy Sosa introduces him? That'd be.
Oh, now you're dreaming. And they unveil the statue of Sammy Sosa at the same time.
Oh, it's all together. It's just the craziest 15 minutes in Cubs history.
Oh my gosh, the amount of heads that would explode in that audience. Goodness. Oh, there's Bailey. I was wondering when we would see her.
Yeah, the dog. We got a puppy, so I'm glad she stayed quiet. She's hanging
my
around.
Gosh. Lance, fun as usual. We still need to figure out what we're doing at CubsCon.
For sure.
We'll talk about that offline. But guys, this has been another episode of Live with Lance. Sean Hendrickson, thank you so much for producing. You just made life so much easier for me. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time, guys.
See you guys.
See you guys.